Behold, my glorious supporter Maji has requested Warframe. We're going to adapt a champion, a god from Smite into a Warframe. Maji says, imagine that you, Mr. Pants, are a pro league Smite player. Your incredible build crafting skills and amazing team crafting skills put you a cut above the rest. I always knew it would be true. Folks, I played a lot of League of Legends back in the game, and Smite is League of Legends, but from third person, and I know people who play a lot of Smite are going to be really mad that I said that. I know, but it basically is. And so it kind of makes sense to import a character from Smite into Warframe. These games have, creeps minions in the lanes, the jungle dudes. There are lots of small enemies and more tanky, usually bigger enemies, the player characters. It's kind of like Warframe. I don't know. There might be something there. Smite has decided to make a collaboration with Warframe. They're asking you to import one of their characters. Being a man of culture, you obviously pick Jormungandr. Not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, but the worm, the Norse mythology worm. Jorm in Smite is a guardian tank. I don't know that much about Smite's metagame, so let's learn a thing quick. His role is to support his team by keeping them alive, CCing the enemy so they can do damage and pick up kills. The Guardians usually have good health and defense, but not very high damage scaling, so it encourages them to build for defensive stats. Right. Yeah, he's a tank, or sort of going to lead the charge, right? Is Jormungandr male? Anyway, CC is kind of lacking for this class. This character is considered not very powerful in Smite, so let's redeem them. Cool. You made an important point that we're gonna say to start this discussion. Maji includes that the goal here isn't just to literally translate him one for one into Warframe, but to get something similar in terms of gameplay. So of course I haven't played this character, so that's gonna be a little hard, but I'll do my best. Let's move my chair out of the way, and we'll read what this character's abilities are. So kind of like in Warframe, I see that there are 3 abilities and then an ultimate. I haven't played Smite in long enough to have remembered that. So let's read what those things are. But yeah, I would say compared to games like League of Legends, to Smite, to games of that ilk, a big difference from a design perspective in Warframe is that movement abilities are less valuable. Not because moving isn't valuable, but because the player is already very, very powerful in terms of movement. So unless we make the player less powerful and then more powerful in a different way again, we don't need to worry. So anything that makes you move, we need to be careful, because that's often not... Because it isn't necessary, it's often actually kind of bad in Warframe because it ends up being restrictive. If you could just apply the damage without needing the movement tech, think like Grendel, for example. Meatball doesn't necessarily do bad damage, it's the way you apply the damage that's kind of awkward, right? If you didn't need to do it with movement, Gauss's Mach Rush is a solid ability, and it's not a problem that you have to hit the environment, but it's the worst part of the ability. That's what I mean. Anyway, let's read what this character has, and then we'll see how it could adapt to I'm reading right now. So Jorm is so large that he cannot be affected by hard displacement. I assume that means like getting knocked back or something. Instead, he gets dazed, basically like a slow stun. Oh, you take more damage for the duration. Any attack speed past base speed speeds up the recharge of Jorm's basic attack. Okay, that seems normal. Jorm's basic attacks don't proc item hit effects. Okay, that sounds bad. So this ability sounds a lot like Rhino, except with kind of a fairness negative. It's also not a PvP game. Now, balance matters in a PvE game, and anyone who tells you it doesn't understand how games work. Having things be balanced makes choice feel real and appreciable and like it matters, and lets the player feel clever when they figure out a way to gain something by using ostensibly equal parts. Balance matters in PvE games. It does matter more in PvP games. And so, of course, we don't really need there to be a negative. We can just say, you're a heckin' worm. You don't need to, balance or whatever. How are we going to make you worm-like as a Warframe? I think in this passive section, we should think about that. Yeah, high base health. Is there a way to move in a worm-like way? You could kind of float as like a dragon, like a little snaky, a sky dragon worm thing. That I could imagine that. The digging, it's really crashing through the earth, and you'll see in a few later abilities that I read ahead on, this character does that. It just kind of crashes into the earth and then burrows up and burrows down and burrows up. That's cool. Can we do something like that? I think maybe you could. You might be able to make it work by doing some greedy coding. This isn't going to be in the actual game, but I sometimes I like to not be too greedy like that. Where you know you animate this Warframe burrowing into the ground in and out as they move normally, and then that could be made part of their abilities. Yeah, I don't know. Let's leave that alone for now and say you float by default. But your massive and your control of the space around you or whatever makes you immune to stuns. How is it going to be different from Rhino? Yeah, I don't know. Or, characters that don't get, or whatever, that don't get knocked over. Valkyr has a passive like this. Yeah, in Warframe, I'm trying to think what would be a good, I guess that's not Rhino. I mean, I meant Atlas, but Iron Skin on Rhino. There are a lot of, it's not novel to be immune to stuns in Warframe. That's what I'm thinking of right now. What do we do about that? We'll come back to that. First ability, Venomous Haze. Basically, this makes a toxin cloud in an area. You can have a bunch of them out at once. It slows enemies. It's a slow. So this is a type of poison design space where you have lots of fields of poison. It's not infection like Sarin. It's more like polluting the ground, I guess. So that's a different design space already. Sarin has a toxic lash augment that's a lot like this actually, but you could just put it wherever. And then it interacts with another ability that we'll get back to later. So cool, yeah, we could just let you put down poison fields, and they're going to power up other abilities. I like the idea of this being a first ability that is more of like a synergy node rather than focusing on being like a powerful damage ability. I really like that about Sarin Spores is actually a good example. But characters like Volt, you can interact with his shield and his Tesla coil thing. Discharge by using shock, and it's not meant to be a big damage ability. It's like a stun one-handed action, and then you get the idea. I like that. I think having an ability like that is cool. So this will spray out some poison. It'll do a slow. That's nice. I kind of like the idea of it being a stacking slow, so you can have one really thick poison cloud and one spread out one. One thing I don't like with abilities where you can have a bunch of instances of them out at once is usually there's not a good, you either always want to stack them or you always want to spread them out. So making them benefit from stacking by making it do an increasing slow, that sounds cool. Having it not be cold means it will usually stack with cold in Warframe, so that interests me. Maybe the passive could include something like that. We might just redo the passive because it's not novel to not get CC'd, but maybe we can come back to that. But the passive could include something like every stack of toxin also slows enemies. Like toxin now has a slowing effect attached to it that stacks, multiplicatively with cold. That would be pretty good. That would be a rather powerful passive against enemies that don't die literally right away. That will quickly make them unable to fight back while you kill them. Yeah, perfectly solid, especially for a tanky character. He'll just naturally he won't need to be tanky, I guess, but go figure. So that's fine for now. We'll come back to it. There's some synergy with the other abilities I think we can maintain. The second ability, basically you do like an AoE roar, it sounds like, and it does more damage the more poison that is nearby. So the more of your poison clouds that are nearby. You get an increased AoE for the damage, and you also get like a sort of basic attack speed up. You attack faster, so you get attack speed. This one, I think it's more interesting to like it being a damage nuke is not the interesting part, I would argue, and it seems more interesting to have this be like an attack speed buff based on the nearby clouds. It's something we have to be careful of here. I think the most interesting thing about porting a character from one game to another is that you need to consider what design aspects change between the two games. In a game like Smite or I'm just using League of Legends because so many people know it, I'm sorry. It's interesting to have it be more powerful the more clouds you're near, because you have an opponent who could have ideas of their own and try to make it so you can't be near a lot of clouds you've placed. And the feeling of being in the lane and having this experience of you place a cloud and then the other player is like, oh, there's a cloud there, so I got to make sure I'm not near too many clouds or I get bombed by this ability, right? That's interesting. In Warframe, that is not interesting. So because you could just, the enemies don't do that. You can just have all the clouds be there and then you roar. So it might make more sense to have this be like you roar, and then if you're near a cloud, then you just get the effect of the attack speed. The roar could be a stun, a slow. What do we do? If we didn't already have Expedite Suffering, which makes damage over time statuses do all their damage at once, this would be a good place for that. We could just have them tick for their total damage and stay on, or like refresh the duration of poison toxin status effects. It could be kind of cool. I could see that. Or even refreshing the poison cloud duration. That might be a bit much. We could limit the number of poison clouds like they do, probably to less than 9, but go figure. Yeah, anyway, the idea of it having a bigger AoE the more clouds you're near is interesting, but again, feels like more of a MOBA thing than a looter shooter thing. The idea of it increasing attack speed and then your clouds refresh sounds cool. It's like a battle cry, but like the toxin version of a battle cry thing. Maybe refreshing status duration is a cool idea that there aren't a lot of Warframes currently doing something similar, or abilities. So refreshing status duration, you get attack speed. Okay, you get a buff that gives you attack speed while you are in a poison cloud. You get fire rate and attack speed while in a poison cloud instead. I feel like fits Warframe a little bit better. So this worm has a sort of domain in which they're stronger. That appeals to me. So let's go with that. And now we have the third ability. So this synergizes a little bit with the poison clouds. You dig underground, and then you can lurk under there. You have like heat vision, and you can pop up and ambush enemies. Does it do a stun? Emerging through a toxin cloud creates 2 new ones. Okay, probably the way we should adapt this to a game like Warframe is just have emerging in a toxin cloud refreshes it. How do we make you submerge? I think this is the part where you might be able to code something where you go into a cloud, and you can only go in a cloud, and then you can only emerge out of a cloud. So your clouds become teleport points, but how do you UI that? But that sounds cool. And the idea of you stunning between them, this would be really good in like interception or some defense or survival missions. It'd be useful where it helps you move around the map. Interception in particular, this would be really interesting. Reminds me of other Warframes that generally leave effects on other points to defend them, but Jorm here would be able to just straight up teleport to the different points, a little bit more like Wisp. It's how some people play Wisp. You can use her Breach Surge to teleport to your reservoirs. This would probably be easier, but harder to set up because you need to maintain the poison clouds. It would often make sense to maybe refresh, a poison, teleport to one that refreshes it, and then poison cloud one that's in your line of sight. How long is the rage on this poison cloud thing? You're a big worm. Why can't you spit a poison cloud far? Sure, it's fine. But then you could teleport to one to get line of sight on another. I think traveling to one should refresh it. That seems good. Needing to maintain them. This is one of the few Warframes where I think having a timer on refreshing the clouds is actually interesting. Like that makes it fair rather than just you can always teleport everywhere in the map. So that's cool, and refreshing it if you use it seems reasonable. Maintaining the one that you use a lot, and then if you try to maintain a lot of them, it gets harder. That seems elegant. Yeah, just being able to teleport between them. I like the idea of there's a movement speed thing in here. I like the idea of, because we're not probably having you travel underground, that would just look weird in Warframe, I think, because it's got so much elevation. Unlike a MOBA, let's give you move speed after you emerge, maybe, and then it can scale with strength, and maybe get even stronger while you're inside a poison cloud for a brief time. After you leave for a few seconds, you're faster still, and then the base movement speed has a duration. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I'm feeling this so far. Oh, I thought of what the ultimate should be. So the fourth ability, in Smite, it sounds like basically you get to travel somewhere on the map and like get big, jump through the ground, dig back in, and then emerge, go back in, emerge, go back in. You have to do it a few times, which is cool. Sounds very World Serpenty, right? Here's how you do it here. You're like the little worm, but then when you use the fourth ability, all of your poison clouds get, worm segments, jumping in and out of them and joining them together, and it does damage on all of them or between all of them somehow. I don't know exactly, but something like that seems like a perfect fit. And then you're really incentivized to put them in places where enemies will often be. That sounds fun. It would look really cool too. This is the kind of fourth ability that I feel like for processing power reasons, it might need to have a cooldown, you know, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Or it could be something like a worm gets ready to jump out of a poison cloud on every poison cloud, and then all of them have to have jumped, or like most of the, not all of them. Well, yeah, I guess then the duration of a cloud could wear off, and that could be it. So rather than giving it a cooldown, the way most abilities solve stuff like that is like you can't recast the ability, and so this just primes worms to emerge out of the ground. That seems okay. That seems reasonable. Sure. Does any of this help us with the passive? No. No. But the idea of enemies with toxin get slowed appeals to me. The idea of making this a warframe with toxin and cold sounds kind of cool, like uniquely mixing toxin and cold. Having a little bit of cold seems good on a warframe that would get so much if you have an enemy affected by your toxin stuff, like your clouds, and then when you use your fourth ability and all the snakes emerge from all the different clouds, then they get some cold status effects, and then you see enemies just freeze. That's good. I feel like when warframes have such an explicit synergy like that, you should include a little in the kit, but then make it like if you wanted to bring cold weapons, then it would much more often be a relevant synergy. And you do have an attack speed buff in here. This warframe is fast. Why is this chonk warframe so fast? Yeah, I don't know. I think being tanky doesn't have the same meaning in warframe. It would actually be more fair if this warframe was pretty squishy. So I don't know, but the passive being that toxin status effects apply a separate slowing effect sounds cool. The idea of enemies, maybe toxin status effect enemies, it's a separate slow. They also do less damage to you, and you can't be stunned by them or something like that. Like they get weaker, and so they can't stun you. Sounds interesting. Like that seems useful. It solves the problem with slowing enemies in Warframe, where you slow like a heavy gunner and they're just useless, but then you slow a bombard and it's like they can only attack once a minute, but they still one-shot you. You know, and so having them do less damage also might seem overpowered, but for enemies that slows are good against, it doesn't really make it any, it's already irrelevantly good. And enemies where slows are not very good, it actually makes it more worthwhile. Like now slows are actually good against bombards because you've reduced their damage. They do less damage critically less often, which is good, but if you just get one-shotted every time anyway, it's still pretty annoying. So go figure. I mean, you don't get one-shotted by bombard, but you get the point. At a higher level, it's like they're surviving and you slow them, but they still one-shot you when they actually attack if you don't have a shield gate or a million other things, but whatever. So yeah, that's my Jorm. Sounds fun. It sounds like a good zone control warframe. I think we have a good amount of parts of Warframe that benefit from zone control, and there aren't a lot of Warframes that are really good at it, especially Warframes that are really good at doing damage to enemies in remote locations. I think the only catch here is that like a lot of Warframes, like a lot of Warframe right now, a lot of this is kind of dead in the water as far as damage against enemies that have armor. It just doesn't really have a way to do anything against armor. The idea of being able to... What's the solution for that? You can travel between them and soften the enemies up after they're poisoned. Like, one thing I like is that you accumulate a bunch of toxin, and then if enemies that are armored, you know, aren't taking that much damage, you can travel there using the submerge ability, travel to that poison cloud on that interception point or something, and then just give them some corrosive or reduce their armor somehow, and suddenly they'll take a bunch more damage. Getting that gameplay flow right could be really cool. Maybe a way to do that is that in the poison cloud, it refreshes the stacks of toxin, so you don't have to worry about like they're in there for a little bit and then you get there just a little too late and it's all worn off or something like that. It can really stack up, and then enemies that do survive because they have armor or something, you would have the experience of traveling to the point and then you can quickly corrosive them and they just die, or like heat proc them and they just die. Or you're at a nearby point, you shoot a grenade or something, you fire the ogress and it heat procs them all, they lose half their armor and suddenly take way more damage, something like that. That seems like it would be good a lot of the time. It feels like this Warframe has enough because there's a speed ability for missions where you don't need to defend multiple locations, that it seems like it's not like there isn't anything to do if you're in a mission like that. Like an exterminate, you can just pop a cloud, dive in, dive out, consuming bellow and make a cloud every so often to maintain it, and then you're still getting attack speed and movement speed, and starting out with a bunch of statuses. It would still be good for condition overload. I think a critical part of this Warframe, this champion, this hero, this god, this Warframe, is that the spit, the toxic cloud ability, that has to be fast. The casting time should be like really, really quick. Probably a one-handed action, and we'll have the flavor be, or just like no animation time, because the flavor is you spit it out, like it's from your mouth. This Warframe is probably gonna look kind of weird. I guess like Wisp, sort of. I don't really have a good image in my head of what this Warframe looks like, but I guess like Wisp. This Warframe is maybe a little too similar to Wisp, but go figure. I do think there's some design space there. Certainly having a Warframe that floats and then has the toxin clouds that you can travel between, players would say that was way too similar to Wisp. If you did both of, it's just the critical mass of similar things. But the gameplay loop for this one is fairly different. I don't think, and there are some different abilities. I don't think it's really that problematically different. It would be interesting if maybe Submerge would do like a random poison cloud, like you don't target and it's a random one instead, or like the one you've been to the longest ago or something like that. Is kind of an interesting idea. I don't really have more to say about that. It just occurred to me one way you could make it different from Wisp is having it be you don't need to target, or like a big thing about Wisp is in many interception missions, you don't have line of sight on everywhere, like all the points. Is a big thing interception mission design usually has. And this could be a character who kind of gets around that in some way. I don't know how exactly, but you might be able to figure out a way, like if you roar with consuming bellow, that like prioritizes that cloud, and then you can leave and teleport back to that cloud. It's a little awkward, but you see what I'm saying. Something like that. So that could be interesting. I don't know. Again, sometimes I feel like it's okay to push a little bit in the direction of being greedy with your design when we know the Warframe isn't really going to exist. But I don't think it's that fun if you play with the net down and you can just do anything you want. So I did try to make it something that you could maybe implement in Warframe, but we can still be a little greedy because it's not going to happen, right? Anyway, I thought I would read your ideas because you left some. So I'll just go through Maji's ones that I avoided. This whole time I wanted to give you mine. I thought that'd be more interesting for you. It might be more interesting for everyone else if I talked off of your suggestions, but you probably wouldn't find that as interesting as me just saying my own. So let's hear what Maji had. Passive is you get knockdown and self-stagger immunity, but take a bit more damage when you do so. So things that knock down or stagger you do more damage to you, but they don't knock down or stagger you. That's interesting. It's an interesting riff on Atlas's passive. Like you have to be on the ground, but you just are immune to it. This is like you're always immune to it, but it take more damage. I think a lot of people would sort of hate that as an idea because they'd be like, oh, I'm just going to get killed more. But I think it would actually be very good because things that knock down and stagger you in Warframe are often not a lot of damage. And then self-stagger immunity is almost the most important part. So maybe for a bit of protection, you get a toxic mist cloud around you that makes enemies sneeze. For each enemy affected by toxin, you get damage mitigation. Cool. That's kind of a good retread of Ember's passive. You do more damage the more enemies are on fire. You take less damage the more enemies are poisoned. That's cool. I like that. It's one of those things that makes game sense. Like it doesn't totally make thematic sense why you would be more rather than my version, which was similar. Enemies that are poisoned do less damage to you. This is you take less damage from everything the more enemies are poisoned, which doesn't make that much like lore sense, but does make thematic sense. So, for how the character will work in that kind of game, that's not thematic sense. You get the point. Acid pool. You just wanted to pull the ticks for damage, maybe only one or two at a time. I think you're right to restrict the number of pools. Like it shouldn't be, you could do like 9 in Smite, which is in Warframe, that seems insane. Poor people's graphics cards. Consuming Bellow, you want to give him melee attack damage, staggering enemies on hit in an area. Oh yeah, so like a sort of, because you're a big worm, you get this slam thing. I get that. And then your idea was that if you use it in in one of the acid pools, then it ticks faster or like sooner. I like the idea of them ticking quicker, but I see that. That's an interesting idea, that you fight in your poison and then it happens more often, like it ticks more frequently. That's interesting. Submerge, you said you wanted a way to get like to your poison clouds. Yeah, I kind of agree. You also mentioned Hydroid, who there's a lot of mechanics around being in a poison, in your puddle as Hydroid, but it feels kind of awkward and disadvantageous to be in your puddle. Indeed, I think this is something Warframe just struggles with. I don't have a whole lot that's good to say. Maybe a taunt you suggested. Yeah, I could see more Warframes and stuff in Warframe that taunts enemies is some design space I don't think we've explored much. It's often not good because enemies die too fast, but it's still interesting design space that could exist. It's hardly ever bad, like it's not like it's always bad is what I mean. There are plenty of Steel Path missions where being able to taunt would be good. Your team will not frequently just instantly delete all the enemies. You will have time for a taunt to be useful. So that could be cool. And then the ultimate, you wanted to make it like being able to hop in between walls and ceilings and stuff, so you can sort of become a worm that tunnels from place to place. I hit my mic, sorry. It reminds me a lot of in Risk of Rain 2, they have those magma worms. That sounds like it would be fun in Warframe, but I don't think it would be good. You rightly point out that it's like Grendel's meatball, which is really bad. Like moving in that way, even if it does a lot of damage, is still a disadvantage. It's easier to kill enemies by just using your weapons. So you said you think it should have low damage. I think it should have like preposterous damage if you're going to do it that way. It should be like they just borderline die, or there's something like it's hard to control maybe, but if you hit an enemy twice, they just die, like they just get executed. I think that wouldn't be like a terrible approach. That's something I kind of want with Grendel's meatball. It's like if you hit enemies at a high enough speed, they just straight up get killed. I think that would be interesting. Like they get ragdolled so far, they just die or they take environmental damage. There you go. So yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. I really do feel like it should do more damage. You said if the target has their armor stripped, it does more damage, but unstripped would be kind of weak. I don't like that idea. When targets have their armor stripped, they take more. They're dead if they have no armor, So making something take more damage when it has no armor usually doesn't matter, because they're all but killed if they have no armor. I think it should strip armor. Maybe the way to do they would never do that thing where you hit them twice and they get executed. How about this? If you hit them twice, they lose all armor. They lose 50% armor, and it's additive every time you hit them. Something like that. And then you can't modify that with strength or something. So if hitting them once is actually still pretty powerful. If you could cast this quickly and you're just floating around, you see a group of enemies and you can quickly boom and like go into them and then pop back out the other side, aim glide and shoot them. That could be badass. Like that sounds fun. And it would legitimately be effective a lot of the time. That type of quick movement reminds me a lot of Gauss with Mach Rush, which is often pretty useful. Like that can be useful. And the key is that it's very fast. You get in and out of it very quickly, and you get some benefit. Either it's very fast, you knock into enemies and group them together with Gauss with his augment, or in this case you reduce their armor a lot for a very quick motion that gets you there. Also melee weapons, it'd be great. You get into melee range, they lose a bunch of armor, you emerge and then just slaughter them with some heavy attack weapon. It could be pretty good. So yeah, I like that idea. I'm glad we did that at the end. It sounds cool. I have sometimes stuck my nose up at like adapting characters from other games into Warframe. I've gotten a few of these questions now, and it's kind of fun. Like I don't hate it. Don't feel like you need to ask less of these. I don't particularly want more or less of them. That voice crack was the best part of this video. Thanks for the question, Maji.